Welcome back to Horace Goes Podcasting for Gamers with Pong Memories. We hope you enjoyed our last episode with our first proper interview. Nick Thompson was great to chat with, and personally I enjoyed hearing about how he spends his time in his retirement, split between games, community projects and his hands-on hobbies. Nick's attitude and experiences were so encouraging. Check it out if you haven't already. I'm pleased to say that John is back with us this episode. Welcome back, John.
Hello, Kieran. Hello, Terry. Hi, everybody. Thanks ever so much. I found the last episode as a listener, I found it captivating. It's great to hear about somebody whose professional life involved gaming, but also they also fed back to their own community as well, around gaming as well. You know, so it wasn't just a day job. I found that kind of really compelling because it's something that I try to aspire to as well.
Sounded like Nick really had that life balance there in retirement. So we're recording at the start of the new year with Christmas holidays just gone. I had a lovely time with my family, staying at home, making the Christmas dinner. All went well. I didn't get any new video games for Christmas. I did get a fun board game called Forest Shuffle, which is good fun. What did you do over Christmas, John? Did you get any gaming gear?
Well, I did. A dear friend of mine from UCL, Dean Mohammed Ali, gave me a wonderful Ghost Cypher controller as we've been practicing with that. He's got a big game background as well and actively works to create games for kiddies who are differently abled. So he's a very interesting man. Delighted to get the print. So I've been playing that with Predator Hunting Grounds, and I went up to Doncaster to see my dad, and then back down again. Moving on to this episode of Horace Goes Podcasting, we have a guest this week who, very similar to Nick, started out in a totally different career before getting into the games industry for 30 years. It's our guest, Terry Greer, game artist, designer, and now lecturer. Terry started out as, incredibly, a zookeeper at London Zoo. And to be fair, I think that's kind of the ultimate aspiration of anyone's career. With a hobby, though, in art and game design, publishing his own game in Imagine magazine, I remember that, way back in 1983. And Terry contributed art, comic strips to newspapers before moving into the games industry. Now, he's worked on many of the early home computing systems, of course, a Spectrum, Atari, Amiga, and then kind of wearing big boy pants, the Commodore 64, the giant of the 1980s computer gaming, battling to create graphics from 1648K and 64K resources. In this time, you already experienced projects that got canned, even on promising IP.
He joined Microprose in their heyday, working on the XCOM series, which was a smash hit, the Master of Orion 2 title, and other titles as well. And while there, he moved from art to games design. He worked with tools that were in their really early days of existence that are now standards in the games industry, like the Unreal Engine and Autodesk's 3D Max. He left Microprose as the state of the company changed after it was acquired by Hasbro. Terry has worked in the UK, the US and Australia, and in the other games industry, the one to do with gambling. So he's been about. He joined Blitz Games, where he worked on the pitch team, which sounds very interesting, and the Blitz Tech group. Unfortunately, Blitz shuttered in 2013.
I'm just delighted to hear that Terry's been involved in Master of Orion 2. It's one of my favourite games. So at this time, Terry didn't find work in a game studio. He moved on to lecturing about game development, and he started at Worcester University, where he gained teaching qualifications so he could pass on his wisdom and experience to keen students. And from there, he moved to Falmouth University and is currently doing a PhD in long-term agency in games.
So welcome to the podcast, Terry. We're very pleased to have you here today.
Thank you. That was an awesome introduction, and I'd almost forgotten half the things that I've done in the past. I'll be perfectly honest. I think I got, I think it was 50 over 50 list a few years ago, and I was over 60 at the time, so I always felt that I should go a little bit further, maybe stress that point. But yeah, it feels like I've been around since the very early days, and I still find it fun, so thank you.
Terry, it's great to meet you. One of the questions we often kick off with is, let's imagine that you are stranded on a desert island, but weirdly have access to power, the internet, games console, a way of playing games. But I've not used any of those to get off the island. You're very happy to remain on the island. What game, if you had one, would you play?
Oh, that's an awkward question, because I'm presuming I'm not allowed to take an SDK, like the Unreal sort of version of the game, and actually, play around with the editor. So, if not that, I was torn by this, and the only two I could think of was FTL. I love the little indie game FTL to bits. I've probably spent more hours playing that than anything else. I think it's absolute perfection in the way it was developed, and also in its scope.
Can you describe a bit about FTL? What kind of game and everything?
It's a very hard one to actually describe, because basically it's a little indie game, probably picking it really cheap at the moment now. You control a little ship. It's basically a bit like you're controlling the ship and you're sending your crew off to do various things. You start with 3 crew. You can add more crew if you want, or you can upgrade the weapons and so on. You've got to get through 8 little universes and fight the mothership at the end of it. And the whole thing, if you survive to the end, takes probably around 2.5 hours. It's quite short. It's a roguelike, so you don't get to save anything. You just have to save the game and then go back to it. But there's so much flexibility in the way you can play it, and the stories that develop in your mind about what happened. I've seen people actually write a blog about it and write it as if it was something they actually took part in. I cannot get over how excellent that game is. I must have spent 250 hours at least playing it on Steam. It's also quite low spec, so you can run it on a laptop or a Steam Deck or anything like that, and it's great fun.
I did play it, and I always died really quickly.
No, weirdly, I was in the garage this morning, and I had my TV on, playing with kettlebells, and I came across a YouTube video of the top 20 space sims of all time, and it was stuff like EVE Online and Starfield, and actually FTL came up as like number 12. And you're right, you look at it and go, well, it kind of looks a bit Commodore 64ish, if you look top down.
It absolutely does. It looks like crap. The first time I saw the UI, I thought, this is awful. This is messy. It goes against everything that you should be sticking into a UI. But within half an hour of playing it, it feels totally natural, and you realise how well designed the whole thing is. And it's all about the gameplay.
I'm going to give it a go. Going to give it a go.
Definitely give it a go. I can honestly say that I've had more fun playing that than I've had playing an awful lot of games. So, let us know you get. Interestingly enough, they started out making it a fleet battle game. That was what they were planning on doing. So you weren't controlling one ship. You could go down to one ship, but you were going to build up lots of fleets and have them fighting. And then they figured out that really the fun was actually controlling the individual ship and sending people out to do various things and fighting it when you get invaded and so on. And so they concentrated on that. And there's a really good YouTube video from one of the GDC lectures about how they came to the decisions they did and how they actually developed it.
You said that there were 2 games you would take to the island.
I'll just say the other one is probably the peak, in my view, of RTS games, which is Red Alert 2. I would say that Red Alert 2, I've, again, spent so many hours in it. Every 3 or 4 years, I dig it out, I play it again, I play through the whole campaign. I play against my son online. It's a wonderful, wonderful game. I will play that on a desert island without any problem. If I could train a monkey to play as an opponent, that would be ideal.
So on the other end of the spectrum, what is the worst game you've played?
I don't like to put negative thoughts about games, I'll be perfectly honest. But I can honestly...
all somebody's passion project.
Nobody sets out to make a crap game. Even things like Trespassers, it's probably the one that people always think of as being a crap game. I've got a soft spot for, because it was just so bad in certain areas, but they tried to do so much. But the one that I really hate is Elder Scrolls Online. Because it's basically taking what's a single player experience and then ruining it completely and utterly by making you queue in caves for getting the next quest item amongst all sorts of people that are running through the same environment. It is horrible, and I just couldn't take it more than a very short period of time.
Terry, I know exactly what you mean, because some of the quests are framed as only you, adventurer, can save us now. And it's like you're in this queue with 45 other people all queuing up to do the same quest as you. It's like, I don't believe you.
It sounds like a roller coaster ride.
It's terrible, because you'd be trying to sneak through a dungeon and the rest of people running around, making lots of noise, overtaking. You think, what's the point of even trying to get any atmosphere with this and play it the way I want to play it when I'm not allowed to? I'd say that's probably the worst game, and the one game that I've never gone back to. I gave it quite a lot of time, but no, I couldn't forgive it. Ironically, if instead they'd just made it Skyrim, but where you can invite your friends in on your friends list, it would have been fantastic. If they just allowed you to bring in the people that you wanted to play with, that would be fantastic.
I think that's a really good point. Or even if they had like an adversary type character where they had a different kind of play roadmap and you played against them, maybe. I think having a free-for-all just doesn't work at all.
Absolutely good idea, because I did want to do that at one point. We even put a pitch in for it when I was at Blitz, which was anybody who didn't want to pay for it, wanted to see what it was like, could come in as a monster, as an NPC character, and they'd get to play that a bit. If they wanted to play a character, they had to pay for it.
Some good scope there for an asymmetrical type of game where you come in as a low-power NPC type character and you play against the hero, and then you think, good game. It's worth investing time in this. You've spoken about your worst game. Are there games that you feel haven't received adulation and fame that you've really enjoyed, like a hidden gem that you might recommend to people that maybe they've not come across before?
That's another difficult question. I think, after having racked my head for quite a bit of time, I came up with Alice Madness Returns on, because I really love that game. I really thought it was a great title. I like the original Alice as well. I thought the team and American McGee who did it did a really good job of making something different. And it's not without flaws. Madness Returns has some bits which are really quite buggy, some 2D sections that don't quite work, but I loved it. I thought it was trying to do something different. It was really brave, and I loved all the backstory and the cutscene work and everything about it. And so I'd love to see him do more. And I know he was working on something based on Wizard of Oz as well at one point, but that never really went any further, which is a shame. I'd like to have seen his take on that.
So is this an adventure game based on Alice in Wonderland?
Madness Returns, it's basically everything was true that she did, but she wakes up again and has to revisit a sort of warped sort of Wonderland, and there's a dark edge to it. And it's set in an asylum, and she's been treated as being mad, and there's a lot of really good stuff in it, which is different to what you would normally expect. And I think it's one of those things that's been vastly overlooked. I'd recommend people take a look at it. There is a first one. It's just American McGee's Alice was the first one, which has that darkness in there, but not to the same extent. But you don't need to play that in order to enjoy Madness Returns.
Casting your mind back, what is the first memory you have of gaming, or the first game that you played?
Oh, with the Spectrum, it's stuff like Jet Set Willy and Ant Attack. A game called Ant Attack, probably one of the biggest impressions of me. I loved it. Sandy White, was it, who created Ant Attack, I think? I love it. It's not just for the fact that it was effectively an isometric game on the Spectrum, which was an amazing thing to actually sort of create at that time. But it was the first one where you could choose whether you were male or female before you actually played. You were choosing, you were literally saving, either you as a girl, the bloke, or vice versa. And there were so many little touches like that, and the ant escher, where the ants was running around, was so even though it was made out of blocks and it was a grid-based system, it still made some sort of sense and you could find your way around it. I thought it was a lovely, lovely, lovely little title. I spent more time playing that than I care to remember. But then there's things like Jet Set Willy and The Hobbit and all sorts of titles.
Oh, I love The Hobbit. I remember making up our own maps with my friends so we could plot where we were going to go and where we'd been. That's a great game.
It was, and there was also things which would drive you insane, like Thorin would always sit down and start singing about Thorin. Little bits like that in it, which
like the film.
Would start repeating. Yeah, it's like the film, yeah, absolutely. So they just reinforce it and remind you you're playing a game. But I loved that, and it really pointed towards what was going to happen in the decades to come, how much you could actually do with computers.
So, what are you playing now, Terry?
What am I playing now? I'm playing Fallout London, which has blown me away. Fallout London is a mod for Fallout. It's a mod of Fallout 4, done by a team called Team Folon. They spent 5 years on it, 5 whole years on it, and there were up to 100 people working on it. And it was a mix of amateurs and a mix of people who just wanted to work on Fallout, and especially Fallout London. They got involved that were established developers, and they were moonlighting on the quiet. And after 5 years, they ended up releasing it. It's got a whole story to it regarding the problems they had running up to release, and the fact that Bethesda decided to put an upgrade in which buggered it up completely and held back the upgrade for ages. So much so that when they came to release it, they literally gave in on trying to make it compatible with the most up-to-date version of Fallout and said it had to be the Game of the Year edition. You had to wind back the version that you had if it was on Steam, or you got the good old Game of the Year edition and just used that vanilla, and it just worked out the box, which is what I did because I'm getting a free game. I may as well get a cheap version of Fallout on good old games. And I think it's a absolutely fantastically wonderful and important mod, probably more so than anything I've seen in the past few years. I've spent over 120 hours in that game so far, and I haven't finished it. I think if you just went for the main quest, you'd finish it in 25, 30 hours. If you want to play around with it a lot, it's probably closer to 130, 140, 150 hours on average to go and see everything and do everything. That's astounding. That's a free game. It's as big as Fallout 4 and one of the DLCs called Far Harbor combined. It's had over 1 million downloads so far, which is, again, phenomenal. The nice thing is no one has done it for money. This is a game that's been created by people who are just doing it for the passion of doing it, and because they want to make a game set within the Fallout universe. And they're not going to get it any other way, because Todd Howard, who's in charge of Fallout at Bethesda, has said several times that he can't see Fallout ever appearing outside the US because nothing else fits that Americana and so on. And it's relevant to what I teach anyway, because I try and teach people to sort of get involved with putting games together based on existing things like Fallout. It's a good practice, and it also shows potential employers that they can adapt to a particular system. So it's an important thing from my perspective. And the only other thing is I dipped my toe into, have you heard of Indiana Jones and the Great Circle?
Yes.
Yeah.
I dipped my toe into that over Christmas, but I haven't got very far with it. And it does look glorious, I got to say. Again, very, very full and atmospheric. And one of the biggest genius bits in that is that they have the initial tutorial, which is basically a recreation of the first few minutes of the original Indiana Jones film. So you're literally walking through the same dungeon and getting the idol and all those bits.
Oh, excellent.
And that's the tutorial, basically. And it just feels so good. So I think they've hit everything perfectly at the moment. It just feels good.
What are you looking forward to? It's coming out soon.
Well, my fingers are crossed that all the rumours of Half-Life 3 are true, because there are an awful lot of rumours flying around, even in the last week or two, about Half-Life 3. I've had my hopes dashed on that lots of times, but I've got great faith that something probably is happening behind the scenes. They had so much success with Half-Life Alyx, which effectively is Fallout 3, 2.5 or something like that. And that was great fun. Still the best VR game ever I've ever played. Just rummaging around in cupboards with intuitive sort of gloves is just incredible. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful title. So that apart, Half-Life, next Half-Life is what I'm looking forward to next. And a bit further apart, afield from that, I'm also want to see what Larian do next, because, and again, last year was Baldur's Gate 3 as far as I was concerned. It was a wonderful title. Yeah. Now they've decided they're not going to do any more with the D&D franchise, and they're going to walk away from that, which I think is probably a good move, and I want to see what they do next.
No, very good, Terry. So you've mentioned that you still have a bash at Jet Set Willy and the Hobbit, but have your gaming interests changed through life, or have they remained fairly similar, but you've kind of been moved along by, I guess, the winds of change in terms of technology, and that just opened up different genres? Yeah, how have your gaming interests changed as you've explored gaming throughout the years?
I'd be interested to know what your take on this as well, because I don't think it changed as much as what I'm interested in. but what I'm capable of doing has probably changed a little bit. So I'm not so keen on challenge as a game mechanic anymore. I'm more interested on the narrative and the storytelling and on the puzzle aspects of it. So stuff that's more close, slower paced and more interesting. And I tend to play on easy an awful lot now. My reflexes aren't as good as they tended to be, which I think, to be fair, most developers should actually note that us aged gamers don't want to actually necessarily not be able to finish a game. We want to be able to finish it and not skip bits of it. So make sure you put those elements into it. It's not that I don't think gameplay is important. Gameplay is vitally important, but I think that whole challenge, got to make it difficult mentality is vastly overrated. And thankfully, it's something which is going away, and they are giving you easy modes or story modes that you can play games with, so that you can play through it and actually complete it more and more. And that's really useful, especially if they're going after markets that don't normally play games. I think one of the successes of Hogwarts Legacy, I think one of the successes of that was the fact that it had a mode that was just basically a story mode. It didn't do away with the challenges, but it did make them so that you didn't have to be quite so brutally accurate at flying a broomstick and so on. And so it allowed you to actually sort of play the game through. And I think that, that sort of approach, I think, is really vital, I think, for this. I'm not a great lover of what's become the flow theory of gaming, where you've got to keep people in this narrow channel, otherwise you're too frustrated.
Because you get lost.
I think it's wider than that, and if you bring puzzles into it, what happens is that it's the puzzle that becomes a problem. It's not that you're forgetting the passage of time. That whole flow theory is bollocks when it comes to that. It's the fact that you are agonizing over that puzzle, and when you solve it, that's when you feel the elation. And so there's a different way of getting your dopamine hit is down to what you're doing rather than the second to second gameplay.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You have to get that balance correct, haven't they? So that you get the satisfaction without the grind.
Yes,
Yeah.
And a lot of it is grind as well, isn't it? Kill 6 of these. And
That's right. I remember Dara O'Brien, the comedian, talking about this years ago, and he said there's no other form of media that restricts access to the content. So if you're reading a book, you go to chapter 5, he goes, no, I'm sorry, you can't continue until you tell me what's your appreciation of the theme of the book and how have the character arcs changed. And if you don't know, well, I'm sorry, that's just too bad, you can't continue. But gaming does that to you.
Have you found yourself changing your views and adapting your play habits over the years? Because it is a thing that hits us as you get older.
I think for me, it has to a degree in that I look for games with more options. So I do play Call of Duty Plunder a lot with my friends, quite a good laugh. But again, there's more options there to be, to employ guile rather than just straight up 50-50 shoot 'em up. And also Battlefield, where they've got a good balance there, where you can get into a helicopter and you can do things if you want to, but you need a different skill set for that. You need patience for that and accuracy rather than just twitch speed. So I quite like that kind of games that give you a bit more scope in terms of how you go about winning. I've mentioned it a few times, but even though I did get a great reception, but Predator Hunting Grounds, I really enjoy that at the moment, because you can either charge in and go pew pew pew, or you can try and track, see where people are going, set traps, and be more patient about the game.
I mean, from early days, I started out playing strategy and management games, and I still do. Don't think the way that I play those has changed a great deal. Even when I was playing the original Civilization, it wasn't like I always wanted to win through the war approach of conquer all your competitors. I would try and get the science win or the culture win or whatever the equivalents were in those days. But if it's an RTS, then I don't really want to go into the multiplayer versions of those. So it has to be an RTS with a good single player mode. Company of Heroes 3's got a good one. Back in the day, Homeworld had a good single-player campaign. So you mentioned earlier playing Red Alert with your son. So is that your main multiplayer experience, or do you play other ways as well?
Red Alert is fun to play, but that's 1-1 or 1-3 or 4. And that's quite good. I must admit, I lost a lot against my son. He's much better at that than I am. So I don't tend to like multiplayer experience, but there are some games that negate that. For example, Left 4 Dead. I absolutely adore Left 4 Dead. I think it's a brilliant game, and it's nicely paced, and depending on who you play with, it becomes a really pleasant way of passing some time. It's a great mix of cooperation and competition, because although you're all cooperating to survive to the end and you need each other, you're always trying to see who will kill the most tanks or take out the most specials and so on. So there's a lot of bragging rights up for sale, which is quite clever, very clever. I think something like Skyrim, where you could just let your friends in, would be probably my ideal way of running multiplayer. I hate it taking part with other people. I'm very antisocial. The whole point of playing a game is to lose yourself, and you want to lose it with people who have like mind. Then you're not losing it. It's like a tabletop sort of session of D&D or something. You're playing with people you like. What you don't want is all the people who have similar games all yelling and coming into that same environment and ruining it for what you're actually trying to do. And I think that's where the multiplayer comes from me. I'm not interested in it unless it allows me to do what I particularly like doing. And I don't know how you feel about this, because I used to like things like Unreal Tournament. I mean, a little bit of mindless blasting is great fun, but they're not high on my multiplayer list.
When I started playing on the Xbox and multiplayer, I think it used to be more social. I keep my microphone and headphones on and I chat to people. But now, I think it's changed a little bit now, where unless you go in with a team of people you know, I tend to treat multiplayer games just as if the other players were just good AI rather than actually a shared experience. Because I don't like turning on my headphones and microphone anymore. Because normally, my my parent had us questioned multiple times during the game. I don't really need that.
Client for Magic the Gathering at Magic Arena. Clearly, Magic is much better played with real people than any kind of algorithm. They have, since the get-go, massively restricted the amount of interaction that's available in the game. There's a few emotes and a couple of things like good game or your turn. There's no text chat or anything like that. They've been very restricted, and there's always a division of opinion in the chat boards and whatnot about whether that's the right thing or not. But I think most people fall down in the, I don't really want my parenthood insulted when I, play some massive turn.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Yeah. Because I can imagine, certainly when I've played Left 4 Dead with multiplayer turned on, all that lovely character interaction that's written in the form of bots and AI is lost. Instead, you've got like 12-year-olds from Baltimore yelling at you, and it just ruins the entire immersion anyway. So it'd be nice if they did write something in that you could get them in the right voice at least, or at least translating it into something that sounds vaguely like English. Would be quite good.
Yeah.
What are you saying about people from Baltimore?
It could be Delaware, could be anywhere. I'm not particularly. It's just the fact that they're youngsters, and a lot of it's trash talk.
I think it also depends on the type of game, because I played Star Trek Bridge Crew on VR for a little while, and that's a wonderful game for kind of interacting with people. But you do meet some people who are just incredibly annoying on that as well. I remember I got to a point, a dark phase in that, where I was the engineer getting blamed for everything that ever happened. I decided to turn the shields off so we could all die. I was so tired of it.
That's something you haven't seen any of the episodes, is it? Check off quietly, shutting everything off so the ship can get blown up.
He's had a bad day. So we all have to die. But I would definitely recommend it. You do get people interacting, and they tend to be quite nice, if a bit demanding. How did you get into the games industry? What was it that appealed to you? Was it that kind of engaging with other people across the world in a different environment, or was it something else that drew you to games?
I think what got me into it is that I started off with tabletop RPGs first of all. So I can remember getting Traveller, the first game system I got, and I had absolutely no damn idea how to run it, because it comes with everything in there, creating a character, and you can die creating your character before the character's even finished. It's a mostly bizarre system. It doesn't actually go into much detail how you actually run a scenario and how it actually sort of goes into it. And it wasn't until D&D's Red Box came out that suddenly the sort of scales fell away from my eyes, and I realised how you actually referee and play a tabletop role-playing game. And so played D&D for years. That's when I was working at London Zoo. So we actually had a game going on at London Zoo that lasted years, hundreds of years as far as the game was concerned. And Offspring went off to sort of fight and stuff, and it carried on being played during the lunch hours and breaks at the zoo. It was great fun. Probably the most involved world we've ever taken part in. And that was great fun. And then when I left that's when computers started appearing, because there were a few around before Spectrums and Amstrads, but they were pricey. And on a Zookeeper's wage, you couldn't afford to go out and buy a Sharp MZ 2000. But then with the BBC and Spectrum, suddenly it becomes a lot cheaper to actually sort of start playing around with that sort of stuff. That was great fun. And then the D&D group I was playing with, one of the people on there wrote a game on the links, and they wanted to try selling it. And this is before there was lots of large companies sort of selling, but most of it was mail order, and a lot of it you'd get in the small ads, the backs of computer magazines. And there was a show in London, and we got a table, and he tried to sell his game there, and I took along some artwork just to brighten up the stand, really, because I've been doing some science fiction stuff. And I got lots of commissions to work on covers for computer games, and they got nothing, and they didn't sell any copies. That's what set me off, actually, sort of in the games industry, was doing covers for games. And I did probably 200 or 300 covers for games. All the cheap end of the spectrum was vastly undercharging for companies like Interceptor Micros or Analog, and that was fun. And I got on started then doing things like for Gilsoft that did the quill and the illustrator. I even had somebody create a tattoo of the illustration I did on their arm, which is quite good going. I got a picture of that somewhere, which is quite nice. I worked on an adventure games for Interceptor, and I did games like Last Ninja and Pandora by Shahid Ahmed, the graphics for those. And then I started getting into the game design side. I released a game via Interceptor called Xenomorph, which was on the ST and the Amiga, which was a bit like Dungeon Master in space. But then Interceptor went bankrupt, so I gave up the game industry for a while and went to work for the National Rivers Authority. And then Microprose advertised, which was based at that time in Chipping Sodbury, for both artist and game designer, and I applied for both and got the artist job. So I spent the next few years working at Microprose. On the interview, I blagged a copy of Doom, because that was being handed around at the time. And I'm not so sure to this day whether it was me blagging the copy of Doom that actually got it. If it was something I said,
maybe it was a test.
Probably was a test, yeah. Because at the time, the Doom had the innovative system whereby they'd give away the first third of the game totally for free. So if you wanted it, you go and pay for the extra sort of 2 chapters. And that's where I started working at Microprose and working on, first of all, artwork for games, some of which were never released, which is a pattern that's repeated over the years. Then on to game design. I became head of design at Microprose on things like the XCOM series. But again, the XCOM games that we're working on didn't actually see the light of day, which is one of those big, if things had turned out differently and Hasbro hadn't bought Microprose, what would I be doing now, sort of questions.
Last time, in our last episode, Nick Thompson was our guest, and he was a developer, which is the role that writes the code that the games run on your computer or PlayStation or other device. And you've talked about being an artist and a designer. Can you tell us a bit more about those roles?
It was an ill-defined role back at that time, in many ways. Designers thought about what they were going to do, and basically then sort of wrote briefs as to what was going to actually appear within the game, and artists put it together. Microprose at the time had a better way of actually sort of thinking about that, is that effectively there were separate departments. It wasn't always assigned directly to a particular sort of project, but you might get stuff on a different basis. You know, you might be there for a few hours or a few days and then move on to something else. But it changed quite rapidly, because it's about that time that the first Half-Life came out. Suddenly everything in development changed, and you could see that it was going to get far more expensive to make games in the future. Quite a few games that they made that were finished never actually made it and were published at the time, because the next step would be to make cartridges for consoles. And that was a huge expense, and they couldn't afford or risk making lots of cartridges because they didn't know if they'd sell or not. So even though the game was finished, they didn't actually make and release the actual sort of game. There was no digital distribution. It was still all media. Companies were making smaller and smaller amounts on things. So it was a very uncertain world, but it was good fun trying, carve out what the roles were for all these things. It's a thing that actually carried straight through. Nobody really knew, for example, what a level designer was. Every company I've worked at since has had a different definition of what a level designer actually sort of did, and where the ends of their responsibility lie and where the main responsibility was, because everything was handled in different ways. That's still true today. If you go to Bethesda, level designer takes finished artwork and puts the level together. If you go to Naughty Dog, level designer will block it out and pass it to an artist who'll make the final sort of version of it. And so it goes. There's different routes in different genres still to this day. So it's one of those things that you've got to find out where you fit with it. And what I found out is that the mix of aesthetics and logic and mechanics that I thought that has to go into building a game is not the prerogative of any one particular role. And so different people can approach it in different ways. So the best level designers have been those that have had an artistic skill set and also a design skill set as well, and vice versa. They could come from art and just be effectively very good at thinking through what was necessary to make the encounter and the level good, or they could come from design and know a little bit about lighting, for example, or setting an atmosphere and so on. And they were the best mixers, people who were cross-discipline. Although that's totally out the window now. The specialism that goes into things now is just phenomenal. I can see why the costs have gone through the roof. And I can see also why there's such an impetus on, and there's such a fear also of how AI is going to affect all this. Because if you can just brief an AI and it will do one of those tasks for you, will it be doing as good a job or not?
One of those interesting areas where AIs might be useful is in bootstrapping an idea. And you were on the pitch team at Blitz after Microprose. So can you tell us a bit more about what that involves? Because, one interest I have in that is where I work, we're keen to encourage experimentation and small proofs of concept, trying to work out how you create the time and space to do that in our industry. And our industry is nowhere near as high pressure as the games industry. So interested to hear how that works.
That whole proof of concept was hard to actually put together. And a lot of the times we couldn't do it. You'd be responding to a request for brief, basically, or for pitch, RFP. From a company who wanted to revitalize one of their IPs but didn't necessarily know how to do it. And so you'd be continually trying to skirt the line of how much can you push it to make it something new? How much, if you push it, will it not be what it was and it will alienate the brand manager at the company and not be considered particularly useful? And that's something which is really, really hard to actually sort of walk. You've got no idea what they're going to do. And so we tended to sort of put together concept pieces of what thing could look like. We'd talk about how we would like to see, what we'd like to see pushed, and what we thought the core values of the IP were. But we'd also be quite flexible when it came to thinking of, we want that to become an opening dialogue rather than this is what we say it should be. But of course, that's a very hard thing to get across, because if you end up being too wishy-washy in what you're saying, then the criticism of they don't know what they're talking about, they haven't got any concrete sort of suggestions here. It's a very hard line to actually sort of work. We could draw screenshots of what the screen would look like. We could put together flowcharts of dialogue and stuff of that type. But we couldn't actually do prototype, because putting a prototype together would be a huge expense. So we would be limited to about 1 or 2 weeks worth of work on a particular pitch. And I've still got some IP that I put together for that, which is still my IP, which is quite nice to have. I got nice glossy versions of it. And so one day maybe I'll revisit some of those. But it was always fun when you get on a franchise that you'd like. I did 2 pitches for Doctor Who games with different doctors. And they were great fun to do, but again, there wasn't a lot of time. We didn't have the time to actually put together a prototype that would actually sort of show exactly what we were doing. And so we had to rely on them imagining what we were imagining and trying to put together stuff for that. And we came second on both of those. And to be fair, that time, I spent quite a few years there in the push department. I probably did more concentrated design work in those few years than I probably would in a lifetime, because we went through so many different genres and styles and things, and you had to knock it out, ballpark really quickly, and it was a real real eye-opener of how to focus in on a particular IP and how to actually sort of make it shine in a very short period of time. One nice thing is, though, that you spend maybe 3 weeks or 1 week on a project and then effectively it's put to bed. It's not like having the entire 2-year or more lifespan of a game. When you get really jaded with it, you don't get time to be jaded.
Yeah.
You're dealing with a pitch and then it goes out of your hands. You either get it or you don't. And you can walk away from it. So you get a lot of fast turnover, which was great fun. Well, 1 week we had to go out and sort of literally research Twilight in order to put together a dating sim style game based around Twilight. And that was probably the most onerous thing. I have to go and sit through that. Then that'd be out the way and you'd put that all together and you'd send it off. But then it'd be on to something else like Dune or something.
I guess there's an awful lot of experience that you'd be able to bring to your students, Terry. So could you tell us a bit more about what it's like to teach game development at university? And are you seeing the students following any particular trends or setting trends in terms of game development? What sort of things that they like to create?
They like to try to create stuff that's wildly ambitious, and they tend to be very led by what they're currently playing. So they'll sit down for their first game. We're going to make a massively multiplayer online like Squid Game. Set out and then realise 8 weeks in that they can't actually sort of do anything even remotely like it. So trying to get students to be practical in what they can actually sort of do and approach it is probably the hardest. And trying to get them to fit something that fits their skill set, maybe extend their skill in one direction or maybe two at a time and not try and be all encompassing in what they're trying to pick up at a time. Because it's the idea that really counts more than anything else and how they execute that rather than all the technical side. And there's so many YouTube videos out there that will tell you how to do something, but nothing out there will tell you why you're doing something or the reasoning behind why you need to approach it in a particular way. And it's that how and why sort of juxtaposition that I try to get across to them more than anything else. They've got to actually be aware of the why they're doing something. The how is not important. The how can be fixed with a detailed tuition when you sit down with them and go through things. But the why you're thinking this is actually going to work is far more important. And what does that then mean? What consequences of that? And so there's a lot of nice stuff out there already. And now, having come from a non-academic background, I do find myself a little bit at odds compared to what they use as references. But there's some really good references from established developers out there already, which are well worth looking at. One of the main things is door problem. The developer called Liz England, when asked what the designer actually does, used the door problem as a way of actually showing what a designer actually does. And the thing is, okay, you got doors in your games. How big are the doors? How do you open them? How can you tell you can open them? How can you tell how big something can go through them? How can you tell when the door's locked or not open? How can you tell which way the door actually moves? And it goes on and on and on and on and on about all the things you've got to know about even something as simple as you putting a door in a game. And getting across to designers that that's the way they've got to think about any aspect that they want to add to the game. Everything regarding how it actually works in game and how it doesn't work in game as well. What are the problems associated with it? It's a very, very hard thing to get across, and that's the most important part. Is approaching the why of why you do all these things is the main element that I try and teach, because the actual details of exactly what you do in C# in Unity or in Blueprint in Unreal are irrelevant. You've got to know what it is you want to do, and we've got to know why you want to do that, because half the time they'll ask how they can do something, but they won't actually know anything other than they've got a vague idea of what they want to do. Until they can explain what it is they want to do and the why behind it, we can't really help them. And it's getting that awareness of what a designer actually does. Designer designs things, but unlike artists and unlike programmers, design is very nebulous. It's not something which is really easy to define, because by design you're bringing something into existence that didn't exist before. So it's one of those things where I think a lot of designers still end up leaving without knowing what it is a designer does, because you can't actually give a definitive answer. I've done designers who spend their entire life on a game working just on the game physics of a vehicle, literally balancing that or balancing half a dozen weapons. It's not just a question of sticking something in and it working or not working. It's a question of tuning it and making sure it works well for the purpose that's it's intended to actually sort of work at. And that that tuning of it is vital. There was another girl called Jennifer Sherl who went onto Twitter, asked her dev friends what little secrets of game dev that players would be most surprised about if they knew about them. And she got a torrent of answers, so much so that she ended up writing a paper on it and doing a presentation at GDC on it. And the amount of things that people just did in order to sort of fool the players is just phenomenally huge, like simple little stuff which you wouldn't even bat an eyelid with, like the last bullet in a clip does several times more damage than all the other bullets in a clip, so you can get the feel that your last bullet before you had to reload finished off the bad guy. Tiny little things like that which don't affect the overall thing but affect the aesthetic and the emotion of you playing the game. Or in Serious Sam, if a bullet's tested for against an opponent, it uses a 1 meter cube size collision box. If on the other hand it's testing against the side of a building, it uses one that's virtually non-existent, so that it can you can get that feeling of just shooting past something. So tiny little stuff like that. Halo. In Halo, when you're playing Halo, it asks you to look up, and then depending upon whether you press the joystick forward or back, it automatically matches the controls for the way you naturally think when you look up or down without asking you to actually sort of do it. Loads of things like that. Brilliant little shortcuts which underline why you're designing something. Design is to make things easier and more pleasurable. Trying to get those things across to people and realize that that's not polish. Realize that feedback that you get when you click on an enemy, on a character in a game like an RTS, and it acknowledges you've clicked on it. You're playing Red Alert and you click on a character, yes sir, you've selected it, it's telling you you've selected it. Tell him to attack something or go somewhere, he tells you he's on his way. Players need to know what they can do. Players need to know when they've done it. If you don't do both of those two things, then you're not really designing it properly.
How much of the context and culture of the game you can add in on those really simple interactions. I mean, one of the things I like about Company of Heroes 3, it's the only one in the franchise I've played, so maybe it was in the earlier ones as well. The variety of different interactions you get when you select a squad and what they say, and when you give them, it's not always the same line that they say. It does vary, and that just adds that little bit extra, and they're culturally different between the different units and things as well. So adding that colour across the whole thing really brings a great deal of flavour to the game. That's really important.
I remember reading an article about how game dev company were going to tune the music so that when the game became more frantic, the music would also match the tempo. And I'm thinking, when I read it, I thought, really? Okay. No, because I remember thinking, well, graphics, that's where it's all got to be about, the graphics for sure. And then when I actually played it, because if it hadn't been mentioned to me, I probably would have recognised it as being just part of a really, really good game. Because it's been brought out to me in an article and I looked out for it, I thought, gosh, this makes a real difference to the game. And I always thought, it always stuck out to me as being an example of great game design, where the music matched the tempo of the game and it kind of heightened that experience. So what's your favourite thing about teaching games?
I think my favourite thing is when students get it, when they produce something which is totally unexpectedly brilliant. We've had quite a few of those. We've had people do games which could have come out of Valve. Honestly, we had one third year game which called Dr. Bounce that was absolute genius, that was basically using soft body physics, and it was all jelly-like stuff, and you'd fire things off and have to throw the gun at things that would bounce back charged. Very simple stuff, but beautifully written, beautifully sort of put together, and beautifully advertised. They all turned up at the stand that they had on Expo Day, dressed in lab coats to do the presentation. Real good attention to detail, and it's lovely to see that. It's lovely to see them actually approaching things, and it's also nice when you get people who listen to you when they've got a set of skills within the team that might not be everything. They might have no programmers, for example, just artists and writers and game designers, and you manage to persuade them not to go down the route of trying to include lots of coding and then they blow it out of the water by putting something together which maximizes the skill sets that they do have. And it might be more to do with the actual narrative, it might be more to do with the actual aesthetics and the way in which things are presented, or the animation. But it works so well when they actually do it properly, and that's the way they should work. They work to their strengths and not try and just emulate something that's out there. And again, if they approach something, some flavour, some topic which hasn't been properly explored before in games, they can do something really remarkable, be it ecological, be it Depression Quest-like, or anything of that type. Something which looks at a problem from a different set of perspectives, and it's wonderful to actually see that. The ones that or just do something where one aspect of the game is absolutely first rate, and they're great calling cards for them as well when they come to actually try and get a job further down the line. And I like to see them pushing themselves, but not too hard, because they all have 2 or 3 modules they're working on each study block. And the last thing you want to do is for them to put all their effort into one of those. You want them to even it out amongst them all. Proper time management, which I'll be honest, I've never had. So it's good to see them actually improving on the bad time management that I've had in the past. And most of the developers I've worked with have had pretty poor time management as well.
I've been a project manager, and I know all about, well, indeed, being a project manager in the games industry, and talking to artists about deadlines is always a very tricky conversation.
Yeah, artists and...
It's probably a podcast.
Oh, it could, yeah. Artists and deadlines don't go together. It's like writers, they leave things to the last minute and then knock it out. And the good ones can do it,
under pressure.
But the bad ones can't. Yeah.
Clearly, you are very passionate about this learning project, and you are still a student yourself insofar as you're doing a PhD. What are you researching? What's the topic?
Again, it's back to the same thing, I suppose, in a way. How do you know what you can do in a game? How can you affect it? How do you know you've affected it? It's this type of things, because everything we do in games, and the examples I gave, are down to almost immediate response. So if I click on a character, it acknowledges that I'm going to talk to that character. If I click on a door, I get the open door, closed door, or whatever, or look through the door jamb, or I get my options immediately. And that's good design. We've come down the route of assuming that good design is an immediate response to what the player actually wants to do, and making everything really clear to the player as to what they can do in the nature of, we call them affordances. How can the player know what they can do within the game? How that agency actually is manifest. But how far can you push it, I think, is my main consideration. Can you make games where the difference between the agency you've got and the result that you notice is very, very different? There's a big gap between the two. And that's an area that I'm particularly interested in, because there are some things where we do it anyway. If you've got a farming sim, you plant something, you've got to wait till it grows before you harvest it. But at least you've got some feedback all the way through. The plants are growing and you can see whether they change colour, whether they're ready to harvest. But to some extent, that is a delayed reward. It's more that type of thing. And can you do it in such a way that you don't realise what you've done until much further down the line, and can you make that satisfying and interesting in play, either from a player perspective or from a narrative perspective? For example, you could imagine a game like LA Noire, for example, where you're a detective going out, finding out murders, deciding who's taking part in it, etc. Rather than it being separated out LA Noire, like, time really does march on. Every time you do something, time marches further down the line. Depending on how long it takes you to find a dead body or get to look at it, the body's going to be in a different state. You might not even find it till years, effectively, further down the line as far as the game's concerned. How does that affect the experience of playing it? How can you recognise things within it? How can you build that narratively into part of the storyline, and how can you make it feel intuitive? Yeah. I don't know what you can get away with, and I don't know what can be satisfying. I have some suspicion as to what would be interesting to do, but it'd be nice to have some definite proof as to whether people actually find it interesting or not. And either way, it'd be fun to actually work on anyway, and it allows me to effectively play with some sort of procedural systems and systems that will decay over time, and maybe you can go back and do things. Because in theory, it should be really quite fun to do. You can almost imagine something like a repair shed. Imagine something like that. You bring in something that's been found derelict and broken down in a loft somewhere in the game, and you take it in there, and then they can revitalize it and bring it back to life, and maybe find something out about it when they actually do it. Or maybe you could do it as part of crafting, and crafting's more organized. But maybe it's not so simple as saying repair sword. It's something a little bit more involved when you're coming to look at it. You've got to do things in order to find out what information you're extracting from it, or what information you may lose if you don't do it correctly, and you might live with that consequence. But there's a big problem in that we're so used to completing everything within a game. We're quite dissatisfied, it feels, if you can't complete everything within a game. So I think there's an issue there that has to be crossed. In that people have to sort of accept that they're not going to be a completist anymore in games of that type, and whether the world would embrace that, I've got no idea.
One of the big things I try and get involved in is games in education, where, and one aspect of that is, like in a civilization game, for example, and you'll have your own research pathway, and you then develop resources to, and that way then you build up a technology kind of stack. And one thing you're trying to do for our games is say, well, actually, no, why not have a quiz on, say, AI, where it will encourage you to learn about AI, and you use that learning in a Q&A in the game. It'll say, well, which of these things are true about AI? And the game is only limited by your knowledge of that particular topic. So you can fly through it. And so if you happen to be a master of AI, then I imagine your city's going to be pretty AI-ified in no time at all. but also potentially in farming or something. And so the question I was going to ask was, have you seen any exciting uses of games for education, as you've in your experience of teaching students?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I mean, when I was at Blitz, we did have a trauma trainer that we were using a lot, which was effectively intended to be used by medical staff in triaging people who were involved in accidents, and they'd use that, was the idea, to actually sort of triage who should be seen first. And there was a guy there who was used as one of the faces of it, and it's the scariest model set I've ever seen, because literally the blood would drain from his face, and he would literally die on screen as the texture and material would actually sort of literally change, and he'd become dead on screen and pallid, and the complexion would change. Later on, we did do not things quite so similar as that, but we at Blitz, we also got involved with education of and rehabilitation of soldiers from the Gulf War. They worked with the US military to actually put together a training routine for people who'd lost limbs or been badly injured during the war. And these were hardwired to the internet, so biometrics were all measured and sent to where who was monitoring the rehabilitation, and they'd take part in these games in order to do it. And ironically, they'd lost limbs and so on in the Gulf War, but the type of game they wanted was still something that was effectively a shoot 'em up, a third-person shooter. So they were built around it's like a mech warrior style sort of interface. By taking part in those, they'd be rehabilitating their limbs. Where we are at the moment, we're starting to work with other departments within the university, like AMATA, which is the Academy of Music and Theatre Arts, and SOFT, which is the School of Television, to try and think in terms of how certain things could be gamified.
It reminded me of a piece of work that Sheffield Hallam were doing a few years ago. They contacted me around relieving pain or perceived pain from burn victims with having their bandages removed. And what they would do is they would immerse themselves in a VR environment where their arms were placed in what appeared to be a cool dish of water. And there seemed to be some really positive reactions to that in terms of the perceived pain when they had their bandages removed. So there's an awful lot of mileage to be had, I think, in educational games. But if looking forward into the future, do you see the way that you'll be playing games will it evolve any further, or do you still see there being a professional element to game design, development, or play?
I don't know, to be honest. I think games are going to continue to evolve as time goes on. As I say, Half-Life Alyx is one which really blew me away, and the way in which the interface was made intuitive. You didn't have to remember too much the way the buttons pressed, just the action that you redo every day was enough to actually sort of do it, and no button press needed, which is quite amazing. And I could see that sort of intuitiveness being incorporated more into games as development progresses. That would be a nice thing to see. I don't know which way games are going to go. At the moment, there seems to be a big pulling back from a lot of the AAA products, and a lot of them are going down the route of trying to go after the sort of games of service, the sort of games like Fortnite and so on, which are there and become cash cows that you can milk for years and years and years. And there's only so many games that can actually work in that particular sort of way. So I can't see many actually sort of succeeding. So I think it's going to be a big shake-up, I think. And I think there's going to be a pullback to a lot more games that have a definite finite length of time and a single player is what I'm hoping will happen. Or maybe if not single player, more in conjunction with small numbers of people, 2 or 3 people. I would love to see that. Games where you don't have to get everybody together. It's like couch co-op games. It's fun to play couch co-op games, but you want to play them on your own as well, and you don't want to have 4 players there. You want it to be variable so that you get a good experience no matter how many people you've got to play with. I'm not surprised that VR's not taken off, because up until recently, pass-through video hasn't really been available. So when you put a headset on, you're totally cut off from the world around you. You can't see anything in there. I've destroyed or nearly destroyed so many monitors playing VR games. It's phenomenal because you're isolated from it and you're flailing around. You can't see where you are. And it goes, but once you get past through and you can actually see what's around you, it's a different kettle of fish, and I can see that becoming a lot better. So I can see that becoming a lot better, and I think that will improve as time goes on. But I'm hoping that a lot of game development goes back a little bit and does things like what Larian have done with Baldur's Gate 3. They look at the users more and they take more notice of the users, and they don't try and just become things that milk the public for what they can get out of it.
So how might that apply if you do retire, to your own projects? Would you look back at the IP that you still have and turn one of those into a project?
Yeah, I think I'd like to. I'd love to have a go at that. I did write a novel years ago and never went anywhere, but it'd be nice to go back and revisit that. Right, that maybe you can do a game based on it. That could be quite fun to do. I've got so much stuff I would like to do that I'm not going to be bored in retirement. I might even like to get involved with whatever Fallout London team get involved with next, because I
wonder if there'll be more of that, because talk to Nick, we're talking to yourself, a couple of others that we're trying to line up to interview who have been in the industry for 30 years. There has not previously been any retired games industry professionals who might be like, oh, well, now I'm retired, I've got some time, I want to get involved in an open source game movement and have that time to spend on it. Yeah, there could be mass game development projects from
that would be nice to see. And of course, because it's, everybody's retired, there's not quite the pressure of having to make a living out of it. But if you choose well and you put together something really quite interesting, it could still be a nice little learner. And I honestly think that's the way to look at it. Think of it professional, but not professionally paid. In fairness, that's already done in the music industry anyway. If you look at the number of people who used to be professional musicians who just play now for the sheer enjoyment but get paid for the gigs and things they do, I think that's a good model to think about how game development could go ahead. This year, 2025, Popeye is now public domain. Tintin is now public domain. There's quite a few things that have come out into public domain, which is quite interesting. And every year something more interesting appears and comes out. So you can do almost anything you want with those. I'll be honest, I'm not going to get bored. There's so many things it'd be nice to actually get involved with. Maybe I'll found a desert island. I think my main thing, I want to get, and I probably won't do it, but it's certainly an aim at the moment, is to get a boat, get a catamaran, and literally float around the Med, working on whatever the hell I want to. That's a sort of like a dream.
It occurred to me to wonder while you mentioned the options for becoming more and more involved in the games industry, even though in not a paid sense, is that it gives you the opportunity to take a risk potentially in terms of, say, you mentioned that you weren't a massive fan of random multiplayer games, but it makes you wonder there's opportunities to try new things, like maybe unobtrusive asynchronous multiplayer games where, for example, if you and your friend play the same adventure game, you might leave a whole bunch of resources in a particular place for your friend to discover when they're playing through. So you can kind of help each other, but not necessarily be there at the same time, or have to have that server where, that you can, thousands of folks can play in it simultaneously. I think there's some really nice options, I think, for gamers as they progress, maybe in terms of further in their lives, get more time. In terms of playing games, do you think the industry should start to release games that are targeted specifically at an older audience? And if you do, what sort of games do you think might appeal?
I'll be honest, I used to think that, but I think now that we as traditional gamers are getting older, I don't think that's necessary. I think providing it's accessible, providing we start getting arthritis, if we start sort of falling into disrepair that our reflexes aren't there, providing there's a way in which giving us back those controls, I think that would be enough. And providing they put in modes that don't, as I said earlier, you don't require you to be a Twitch player all the time, I think that would be enough to carry on playing what we enjoy playing. Sadly, even though I'm getting older, I know there's a lot of my age which probably didn't play games anyway. I'm probably an outlier in many ways. So it's nice to think in terms of how you could bring people in from that. And I do that a lot. But it's very hard to go against established media because games are so weird. Unless you've actually played a lot of them, you don't see the point of them. And so it's hard to know how you would bring people into it. I used to think that if you had a game like a soap, for example, which would bring people in playing with different characters and their histories, you might be able to bring people in that wouldn't do it any other way. But I'm less and less clear that they'd take to that, wouldn't just think it'd be weird anyway. The people who are being brought up now, coming up with dating sims and so on, love that sort of stuff. So I think, ironically, the things that I would have thought would have done well for older people to suck them into games are probably just going to encourage the young anyway who already play that type of game. So I do know that people that I've met who work on games just like hidden object games have found they find a niche like that amongst a certain age group, and that they can play to that year in, year out, and just bring out new titles. So there are certain things like that that do appeal to certain demographics.
I wonder as well that maybe you don't need different games, but maybe you need different options of play within the games to make it more accessible. There's a wonderful YouTube channel by, I think he's like 67 years old. He's an ex-Marine sniper, and he plays Battlefield, but as a sniper, because then he doesn't need to run around and do that kind of fast twitch 50-50s, and he just sort of camps and destroys the other team. Just ruins them, doing things that I could never do in the game as a sniper, but because he's kind of, I suppose he's very used to that kind of
that's the mentality.
The mentality. I haven't got the patience for that, but he clearly has, and he competes very well at that level. And maybe that's
maybe is. I like that. I think that's absolutely fantastic. But I thought the things like anti-camping rules that brought it, if you stayed in the same place for too long, you get it almost stops people enjoying the game that they're playing, and stops them actually having that freedom, which is a shame.
But you don't feel that, for you thinking that question personally, don't sound like you feel like there's anything the industry would release, say, for your age range versus, say, 20 to 30
other than reaction time stuff, I don't think so at the moment. I might well change. I mean, I've noticed my hands getting a little bit more cramp sooner playing, so I can't play such long sessions anymore. And no doubt that might well become worse with time. But apart from that, I can't really think of much else, because I can always play on easy. If the modes are, then I don't really mind, and I think that's the main thing. Again, come back to students. If you ask a student what age range they're making a game for, it's always 18 to 25. So I just look at them and think, well, so it's not making it for me, and then they get all flustered.
If you were giving hints and tips out for gamers of later years to try and compete with these youngsters, or still get fun from games,
I think John said it quite nicely. Be sneaky. The sort of taking it off, hiding and then sliding from a distance. Being sneaky and making use of your skills and how you understand games is probably the best way of actually doing it, providing they don't block it in anti-camping sort of ways. They may be fast and may be very reactive, but the older player normally has psychology and experience on their side that will even it out at least a little bit. But to be honest, I do rather not play with youngsters because they are much faster, and I'd rather, at least at the moment, play with people roughly the same age. So some form of age-related matching or performance-related matching, I think, would go quite nicely in games of that type.
Something like Magic or chess, things like that, where it's one-on-one, they can have the MMR ranking and tee you up against somebody of a similar ranking.
I didn't know they did that with Magic. There's the rank system for Magic.
They do. It works in the background. So there are tiers, but once you're within that tier, it's also ranking you against in Magic Arena. We've got to the end of our questions. So, did you have a question for us?
You've asked me lots of questions about age-related stuff and how I feel about that. And I'd like to ask both of you the same sort of thing. What have you noticed regarding that within the way in which you've slowed down or changed your approach towards gaming, if any?
I must admit, I still play games I think I would have played at 18, but just a different way. Maybe I take more precautions in the game in terms of making sure I can't be snuck up from behind and shot or something like that. Maybe my loadouts might be slightly different than I would in an 18-year-old, so I probably wouldn't have gone for some kind of fast twitch assault rifle, but maybe something else that suits my gaming style. So it's changed in that way, but also as well, I think poor Kieran said we go on about this for must be like months now, but there are certain games I think that lend themselves well to different gameplay styles. So the Predator game's a very good one in that you can be all pew 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 fast twitch if you want to as Predator, or you can properly track and make a plan and set up an ambush and play the game that way. And I think games that provide that extra scope in gameplay probably will attract people from all ages, because there's lots of ways that you can play the game according to your game style. So I think that's what's impacted me. I'm going to play games I think I've got more scope for different types of play as I progress on into my golden years.
So more like immersive sim approaches towards any problem.
I think so. The current game I'm playing, the Predator game, if I was 18, I'd have got, yes, go to a big laser rifle and just jump in and blast away and see what happens. Whereas I think now my loadout's very different. I use traps, for example, and I look for bottlenecks on the map, and I'll find a position and a place and I'll lead people to it, and then I will then wipe out the entire team, hopefully. But also do pretty horrible things where I will injure one member of the team, so that you'll have to go back for them to rejuvenate him, and then I'll just take out the other team members as well, which probably isn't a very nice way of playing the game, but it gives me makes me laugh.
It gives them a challenge as well, which is good.
I think for me, it's probably not so much about how I play particular games, but the fact that I do play the same games and the same ones and same series. I've just gone back to playing XCOM 2 again because it's just a really good game. Civilization 7's coming out. No doubt I'll get that, and that's a game that I've been playing since the 90s. Seeing a game that catches my eye that's a bit different, or somehow, on the sim side or the management side, strategy side, bring something different and fresh, that's what I've got my eye out for, something that give me different experience to what I would normally go to, because I don't want to get stuck in the ruts that I do enjoy playing, so I do want to keep my mind open to new kinds of games to play. I have enjoyed playing It Takes Two with my daughter, and that's nothing like what I normally play, but it's been great fun.
Cool. I asked the same of John. What game would you be, apart from Civilization, which you said is coming out next month, what game would you probably be most looking forward to?
Thing is, I don't really know that much of what's ahead. I'd love a new XCOM game, but they'd have to come up with another take on the narrative. I think they did well with XCOM 2 to come up with something different compared to you're defending against aliens attacking the world. Maybe it's taking the fight to an alien planet.
On the XCOM side, we were going to be taking the fight to an alien planet in the XCOM Alliance that never came out. John, same question to you. What are you looking forward to?
I've not heard of it even being thought about. So this is John's land of rainbows and unicorns and game development. But I would love Star Trek Bridge Crew but multiplayer. So what I mean by that is you sit with your team on the bridge of a Enterprise or whatever else, but you compete against other teams in their ships as well. I think that could make for a tremendous game. I would love to play that. I think the possibilities for hilarity are, well, there's just so many. But I think that's something that I would happily play. And again, I think that would probably invite people from all ages, because you need to have forward thinking, you need to have persuasion skills, you need to be able to bring people along on your team and say, well, we'll do this. Why don't we try it this way? So there's conversations to be had. It's a lot like the game I often think of, Diplomacy. Do you remember that game, board game from many years ago?
I was playing it just the other day.
Yeah, well, so I mean, that is on paper, that's quite a simple game, but actually when you are playing with people, it's an incredibly complicated, sophisticated game. And I think that sort of game that's simple to get into, but there's got huge depth, I think, is going to be one that I would look for. And I think Star Trek Bridge Crew multiplayer, if you know what I mean, will be a great game.
So yeah, finally, Terry, let's give you a chance to mention any projects, personal or that you are passionate about, or books, films, podcasts that you want to share with our listeners.
I'd recommend you look at Team Folon's webpage for Fallout London. They've been posting since 2019 on YouTube regularly their development. You can look at my webpage, which is terrygreer.com. Have a look at the novel that I wrote as well, a fantasy novel there, which if you've got Amazon Prime, you can download the digital version for free and have a look at that.
There'll be a link to that in the show notes. It's been very interesting to hear about a different side of game development, and about, you see your passion for giving the skills and experience out to young people in game design and bring the reality of that thought process and imagination process to them so that they can go out and create the games of the future, hopefully appealing to all age ranges.
It's very enjoyable.
Terry, it's been an absolute joy, particularly as you've been part of Masters of Orion 2, which I've played so often. Such a fantastic game.
It's a really pleasure to talk to you both. So thank you very much for inviting me. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you.
So thanks for being our guest today, Terry. It's been a pleasure. It's been a great pleasure having you on with us. For our listeners, please follow us on your podcast platform and comment on the episode. We've been through a great deal of different subjects today. It would be great to hear more from you. What have you learned about the games industry today? What did you think of Terry's plans for taking up some open source gaming projects in his retirement, maybe? And do you think that making adjustments to make easy mode for older gamers is fair in games?
Like and subscribe on Facebook and Instagram. Share us with your family and friends. Links are in the show notes. All your thumbs up and likes and everything helps to get the podcast in front of more people. We've had some great conversations already on Horoscopes podcasting, and we'd love to get them to more ears.
And there is exciting content ahead as well. Very soon we'll be in conversation with another industry veteran, Eric Lagell, who's worked on AAA games like Crysis, Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell, RuneScape and Silent Hunter, one definitely much for the patient gamer. So we'll learn more about his life in games and what it's been like inside the games industry over the years. So it only remains for me to wish you a happy new year, John and Terry, and to everybody listening, and thanks for tuning in.
Bye all, thank you very much.
Thanks everybody.